Tuck School. I just want to welcome you, Steve Schwartzman, and welcome you back, David Rubenstein. Amidst all the history of the day, thank you both for making the time to be with us and to prove the maxim that great leaders are great teachers. Your entrepreneurial success and global impact have so much to teach all of us at the Tuck School, and we're in the terrific hands of Professor Marchick to guide us in the conversation. So I'm ready to take notes with everyone else here who's assembled. So back to you, Dave, and once again, welcome to Tuck, Steve and David.
Great, well, thank you very much. We have two fantastic speakers for the class, and this is also being broadcast to the Tuck community. So I'm pleased to introduce to you two of the most innovative entrepreneurs in the country, really in the world today. They're the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates of this industry. In many respects, they created the industry and built it. And so the class has already received their bios and lots of reading materials on their background. So let me just make a few comments about Steve and David. So a few things that distinguish each of them in my view. Steve is a business builder. He has built literally the most dominant firm in the industry. His firm that he built is larger than any other private equity firm. Its real estate business alone is larger than almost every other private equity firm. It's truly just incredible what he's built. He's one of the most prominent philanthropists in the world. He's created a program called the Schwartzman Scholars, which in a couple, in the future will probably be seen in the same light as the Rhodes Scholarship, as one of the most prestigious scholarships in the world. It's a huge, legacy for Steve. He's written a New York Times best-selling book called What It Takes, which I'd recommend that everybody reads. It's a fantastic book. And just so happy and grateful that you could be here with us today. David Rubenstein, in my view, is really a Renaissance man. Few people have the breadth and depth of skills and creativity that David has. He's been a top official in the government. He's been a top leader in the finance industry. He's a historian. He's one of the best interviewers in the world. And he has been one of the biggest supporters of the arts. In business, I would say David has many attributes, but there are two that distinguish him above others. One is that he built truly one of the most global firms. He was the first really to push the private equity industry to be global. And then second is he created the multi-fund structure, which is typical of other asset management firms, but David really innovated with respect to that. He also has a book. It's a fantastic book if you like history, called The American Story. And he coined and developed a strand of philanthropy called Patriotic Philanthropy, which David can talk about. And one thing for the students of Tuck, David, for me, outside of my parents, has probably had the biggest impact on my life. We worked together for 12 years, and he's been a mentor and friend to me. And for all of you at Tuck, as you start to build your career, I would just encourage you to find your own David Rubenstein, someone that can be a mentor, someone that can change your life, and someone that can help lead you to be better. So let's start the questioning. I'm going to ask questions for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open up for the class. So maybe Steve and David, you could just start telling us about where you grew up, what your parents did, whether you grew up with wealth or in modest circumstances. So Steve, do you want to start? And thanks again for being here.
Sure. Thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here with David, who's actually, I think Dave Marchick shortchanged David Rubenstein. He's actually one of the funniest people in the world, as you will find out on this Zoom. And he's a good friend, and sort of a terrific all-around guy. My background's pretty simple. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the United States. Until I was 14, I was raised in an area that, if you were in New York, would sort of look like Queens, semi-detached homes. It was a pretty rough neighborhood with, sort of playgrounds with broken bottles and, kids hanging out at bowling alleys. And, one of my friends, when I was, sort of 8 or 9 years old, his father was assassinated by the mob, and My mother got my father to move us to the suburbs, at which point there were nothing but nice people. I didn't know where all the bad people were. So I've been very fortunate to, have seen two sides of the world. The nice, polite world that we mostly inhabit, and the not so nice world that I at least had a chance to inhabit. And my dad had a store, and I had to work there starting at the age of 8. I got paid 10 cents an hour, which my grandfather thought, well, I was overpaid. He was probably right. And I ended up going to Yale. And then after that, the Army Reserves. And then after that, Harvard Business School. Then I joined Lehman Brothers. So I was there for 13 years, and then I started Blackstone. So,
David,
now I'll hand this over to David so he can do something similar.
Well, Steve, thank you for the kind words. And we should have said at the beginning that Steve and I served together on the Kennedy Center board. He was the chairman for 6 years. And he agreed to let me succeed him. And I'm still the chairman of it. And we worked together then, and we've worked together on a couple of business deals over the years. One we worked on recently, our firms did. Fortunately, we didn't get that deal, I think. But
thank goodness.
Right. So my background is I grew up in Baltimore in a Jewish ghetto, because in Baltimore, the Jews all had to live in one area. They weren't allowed to buy houses from people that weren't Jewish, so you had to live in one area. I didn't know anybody that wasn't Jewish until I was about 13. I thought everybody in the world was Jewish, and I realized that wasn't the case. My father went into World War II in the Marines, dropped out of high school to do so, came back, met my mother. They got married very young. And my father never went back to finish high school, or obviously didn't go to college. So he went to work in the post office. He worked there his entire career, made a very modest amount of money. And I was the only child and lived in a very small 800 square foot house. I don't want to make it sound like I was poverty stricken. We weren't poverty stricken. We had a lower blue collar kind of lifestyle, which is very common in many people's lives. And I took my son back to visit my house to show him when my son was 8 years old. I lived in this very small house. It was a row house, and there were 10 houses attached to it. And he said, "Dad, that's a big house. There are 10 doors there in your house." I said, no, that's 10 different houses. He didn't get the picture, but it was a very modest upbringing, but not poverty stricken. I got a scholarship to Duke University, not a basketball scholarship, I assure you. The only person ever cut from an intramural basketball team at Duke was me. And I got a scholarship to go to law school, and I got the biggest scholarship to go to University of Chicago Law School, where I went to law school. And then I went to practice law in New York, and ultimately moved my way down to Washington to work in the White House for Carter.
Now, you all, one thing in your book, Steve, that you mentioned, and David, I've heard you talk about this. When you applied to graduate school, you both first applied to law school because you said that the smartest students then went to law school. We have a bunch of MBA students here. Do you still think the smartest students go to law school, or do they now go to business school?
Well, I think they go to both now. When I was applying to school was during the Vietnam War, and business was extremely unpopular because business was manufacturing chemicals that were used on human beings, Agent Orange, which ended up causing cancer and other types of things. And so, my smart friends, there was a hierarchy back then. They went to Yale Law School. They'd run into sort of a young girl named Hillary, who became Hillary Clinton, and Bill Clinton was a year ahead. And that was sort of the hot place. Harvard Law was second. Then my friends went to Harvard Medical. And I applied to a bunch of law schools. The only one I got into was Penn. I was from Philadelphia. I didn't want to go there. And so I applied to one business school, which was Harvard, because I always wanted to go to Harvard something. And I got in, and I went. Sort of luck in a way.
David?
I would say, in my observation, the smartest kids in college in my day went to medical school. second smartest got PhDs, then maybe law school, then maybe business school, and so forth. In those days, you couldn't go, you didn't think if you went to business school, you're going to wind up running a hedge fund or private equity fund and make enormous amounts of money, relatively early in life. And so the idea of going to business school wasn't quite as exciting or as attractive as it is today. All three of my children have MBAs. So obviously, I think MBAs are a great thing to have, and I just wish I had had one. But when I went to law school, I just didn't want to spend one more year in graduate school and make my parents kind of pay for another year of graduate school. So I didn't go to an MBA with the JD. If I had to do it all over again, that's what I would do. And that's what my son is now done at Stanford. So I wish I had an MBA, and it's a regret I have. But you have to live with regrets.
So one of the things that's interesting about both of your backgrounds, that your backgrounds follow an interesting similar arc. So you both grew up relative modest circumstances. You both were successful academically, achieved greatness. And then when you were 37 and 38, you did something that was either audacious, visionary, or reckless, which is you both started a business. And neither of you had any investment experience. Steve, you were a distinguished investment banker, but never really had invested any money. And David, you had done nothing in the business world. So why did you think that it was a good idea to start a private equity firm, an investment firm? And would you do it today, knowing if you were 37, and would you have the guts to start a firm like you did?
Well, I had a relatively easy decision. I had sold Lehman Brothers, which, always was getting into some financial trouble, and it was basically broke in 1984. I sold the business to American Express, and I didn't want to stay there. And so I also had signed some documents where I couldn't compete. So I had limited number of things I could do in finance. And for me, the decision to start something and go into what was then the nascent business of private equity was easy, because I had, starting in 1981, 82, advised there were two firms that were the most active then. One was KKR, the other one was Forsman Little, and they were doing what we would regard now as exceptionally modest deals. The whole KKR 82 fund was $110 million, and so hardly anybody would represent them. So these were social friends of mine, and so I represented them. I knew what they did, and I looked at that model and I said, this is like a killer. And they were buying companies at very low prices, and so you didn't have to do much except put leverage on it, and you'd make a lot of money. So I looked at it and said, I've been in the room when all these deals are being negotiated. This doesn't look very hard to me, so I'll go and do it.
Well,
And
in
David?
my case, I was a lawyer, but I wasn't a good lawyer. To be a good lawyer, you have to love the practice of law, and I didn't love it. And nobody can achieve anything great if they hate what they're doing. Nobody's ever won a Nobel Prize hating what they do. You have to love it. And I didn't love the practice of law, and it was clear my clients didn't think I loved the practice of law, because my clients didn't think I was a very good lawyer. So I decided I had to do something else. I wasn't quite sure what. Then I read that Bill Simon had done a leverage buyout, and he had made on I think a $333,000 investment, $70-some million. And I didn't know exactly what a leverage buyout was, but it sounded more attractive than practicing law. And I also read that entrepreneurs start their first companies between the ages of 28 and 37. And after the age of 37, your chance of starting something different or a new company was limited. So I said, I'm 37. I don't like practicing law. It doesn't like me. So if I could find people who actually knew finance, had finance backgrounds, it would work. So I didn't have any finance background, but I was able to get Bill Conway to come and Dan Daniello to come, and they had a lot of finance background. And so I thought I could surround myself with people who actually knew what they were doing a lot more than I did. And I would take on a different role, which would be to, let's say, help raise the money or other things.
Just
So David,
in terms of the funny thing, David, is I sold Bill Simon Gibson greeting cards. And when I was an investment banker, and it was one of the few unfairness opinions I ever gave to the seller, because by the time they actually closed on the deal, we set the deal, the company had rallied so much that by the time they bought it, it was a guaranteed success. And I knew they'd make a lot of money, and I was worried about our reputation at Lehman representing the sellers. So I just told I told the head of RCA, who was the seller, that this deal is not fair, I wouldn't do it. And he said, thanks for your advice, I'm selling it anyhow. And that helped start an industry, if you will.
Well, it was a great deal for them. I think they only held it for 18 months before they took it public or something like that. It was a spectacular
Yeah, I think
return.
they created it around 5 times or 4 times cash flow. So.
Okay,
So
well, I wish I had known you then. I wish I could have bought something from you then.
Yes,
let's talk about your innovation. So David, you basically created the strategy to have a multi-fund strategy and then also go international. So other firms didn't think of that at the time, or why did you think of that? How did that work?
I don't want to say that I was the only one that did it, but I would say that after we raised our first buyout fund, which was only $100 million, I began to think of the idea of having multiple funds. Like Fidelity had multiple products, T. Rowe Price had multiple products. And I thought if we could build our brand name such that we could go out and sell different products in different areas, it might work. And so after we actually raised our second fund, which was, I think, about $1 billion, I then went out and said, okay, now we're going to have a fund in a different area than real estate or venture capital or growth capital. And then later said, like, if we can do that in the United States, why not go recruit people in Europe, Asia, Japan, so forth. I think my partners were happy to get me out of the office so that I could leave them alone to do the investments, and I would run around trying to recruit people or raise money. So it kind of worked out. I don't think we did it as well as I would have liked to. In the end, I made a lot of mistakes in it. And I think Steve has taken this model and made it really perfect in many ways, because he's got different products and he's really all over the world in many ways. But we did it, and I think we made some pretty good steps in some areas. We're just much bigger in one area than we are in the others. I think that's different. Steve has strengths in all of those areas.
So Carlyle's private equity business is unbelievable, huge, and perhaps the most successful. Steve, one of your innovations is you have scale in multiple businesses. So Apollo's known to be great at distressed and credit. Carlyle's known for its private equity firm, but you have 5 or 6 businesses which all have scale. So was that always part of your strategy?
Yes, actually was. When we started, our strategy was threefold. The first was to go into the advisory business, which required no capital. So if you talk to people and they give you millions of dollars, and your only cost is a lease, that's by definition a pretty good business. And I wanted to use that to basically create the cash flow without diluting myself very much to go into other businesses. So the 2 other businesses that we decided upon and wrote a strategic plan and sort of told everybody we knew, set out a sort of a announcement. The second one was private equity for the reasons that I think David's explained and I did. It's just like an amazing business, with good cash flow that's predictable, as opposed to the M&A business, which is episodic, as well as a carried interest. So the combination of that made that good. And the third thing is I was aware that finance is cyclical. And that there's sometimes where things just collapse. And when they collapse, they usually stay at a bottom for a while, and then they start going up. If they start going up and you catch them right when they're going up, you don't have to catch them right away. You can let them go up 10 or 15%. That if you attack something that's a giant area, and you recruit somebody who's a 10 out of 10, to help run that business, but you maintain control of at least the exits, and the business also had to generate intellectual capital to make the rest of our business stronger, because the more information you have, the more, today they would call it data, that you have, the better it is for making decisions. And so we called these types of things affiliates. And we didn't know which ones we would go in, but we decided we'd just wait. So we didn't have any manifest destiny. We just waited until some absolutely wonderful thing came by. You watch it for a while, and then you jump into it, and you commit everything you have, your emotional life, your physical life, and you get the best person, and you really crush it. And that's our strategy. I must say, we haven't evolved. We're still doing the same strategic plan. And every time we go into one of these things, the objective is to be the biggest or the best in the world. Now, sometimes you don't achieve your objective, but if you can't see yourself in that position, I'm not a believer of just going into something because somebody else is in it. And usually nobody wants to go into something when we're doing it because the timing has been people have lost money or whatever it is, and you just have to see the turn. And if you see the turn and then you have some data that shows you it really is turning and you get into it, that's what you do. And that's how we've ended up where we are.
Got it. Let's talk about what your firm's best deal ever was and what was the worst deal or the biggest miss. So David, do you want to start?
Okay, well, our best deal probably was we bought China Pacific Life, kind of not very successful life insurance company at one point in China. And we turned it around with the help of a lot of people. And we probably made about a $5 billion profit, which seemed like a good profit to us at the time. So that was probably our most profitable in terms of quantitative dollars. And we've had a couple of $3 or $4 billion profit deals as well. The biggest mistake probably was we had a credit business in the right before the bubble burst in 2007 or 8, and it went under, and we lost, the investors lost about $1 billion in a credit business, which is a lot of money to lose. But personally, my biggest mistakes were, I was offered a chance to invest in Facebook when Mark Zuckerberg was in college, and I didn't think that would get anywhere, so that was a mistake. And then we had a chance to own maybe 20% or so of Amazon at one point, and we turned it down. And then when we got some stock in Amazon, we sold it at the IPO. That was probably a mistake.
And why did you went out and met with Jeff Bezos famously when he was in a warehouse, and you told him maybe if he does something right, he could become something? Or how did that conversation go?
I told him that I did the calculation that he was ultimately going to be worth as much as $300 million. And he said, no, I'll never be that rich, but I probably won't take the company public. I'll be okay. But I was wrong. He wasn't worth 300 million. It's closer to about 1.5. I guess about 150 billion or something like that. So he's done pretty well. I wish I'd held on to the stock, or Carlyle had held on to the stock, but that's life.
And Steve, what's Blackstone's best deal ever and your worst deal or biggest miss?
Yeah, I think our best deal was Hilton Hotels. We bought in right before the global financial crisis. We knew there'd probably be some collapse, but the company had huge overlapping costs. It was basically 4 companies. They'd never consolidated anything. So we knew we could take at least 500 million out of costs. And we felt that the company could be very dramatically expanded with no cost by having other people buy the hotels and us take management contracts. And as soon as we bought it, which is somewhere around July 7th, 2007, the credit crisis started that led to the financial collapse about a year later. And so we had a good first year, actually, and then sort of the roof caved in financially, and the earnings went down. We actually even had people writing articles that we were going to go bankrupt, which was, like, I thought, completely absurd knowing the numbers. But that doesn't stop journalists, by the way, from putting on the front page of magazines. And so we rode through that. and did our plan, and we ended up making $14 billion of profit. Now, as David tells you about mistakes, that he's made, we all make mistakes. We could have kept that longer and would have been 21 billion. So we sort of, I look at it, it was a great deal. Could have been even better. Worst deal was early in my career with the steel distribution center. It was before we had systems at the firm. One of my new partners said it was a great deal. He had the relationship. Another partner heard about the deal, came into my office, said this is like horrific. When steel prices go down, this company's going to collapse. It's only making money accidentally because steel prices are going up. I unfortunately, I had them both come in together and pitch me, if you will. This is one of the truly egotistical moments that you can only do when you're 38. I listened to them both and made pretend I was King Solomon, and I picked the wrong person. The one who said this was a great deal, and within 3 months they couldn't pay their principal or interest, and the company ended up. We sold it to somebody after we put more money in. We almost lost the more money, but we didn't, and it was a horrific experience. But the thing that's important, besides it being awful, it was so embarrassing to me personally, because I was the one who said yes, is I vowed I'd never have that happen again. It was so horrific a decision. And that we set up a whole bunch of processes and open dialogue and the ability to critique deals. We didn't even have an investment committee when we started. What did I know? And now we have this extremely robust critique that we do to minimize the chance of loss. It works quite well. It keeps everybody alert, and that never could have happened if I hadn't made this awful decision. So what you learn in life is you continually have to take situations where you fall short and never let that particular thing happen again. You have to openly talk about mistakes, and you have to figure out what you need to change. So those are my two.
Got it. So let me ask you a few last questions with maybe we can go quickly back and forth when we can get to the students. So David, you interviewed Dr. Fauci last week. You're pretty close with him. What did he tell you about how we're going to get out of this mess and when we're going to get out?
Well, he didn't say that he didn't have an easy way to get out of it. He just said that obviously until we have, more social distancing, and we have people wearing masks and basically self-isolating for a while, it's not going to break the back of this and so-called flatten the curve. So his view was we should have to keep with this for a while. He recognizes, though, the economy has to come back at some point. People have to go back to work and go back to their life. But he would prefer, I think, without putting words in his mouth, that we keep with what we're doing for a bit longer. But he recognized that at some point we're going to have to go back to life. So he didn't think there was any easy answer, for sure.
And both of you are prominent philanthropists. When in 100 years, when history is written about you or when students are studying you, what do you think your biggest legacy will be? Will it be creating the businesses you've created, or will it be your philanthropy? Steve, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I don't think about my legacy. I don't think I'm like a historic figure. I think I'm a person, and I try and do things that are good things, whether they're at the firm or they're doing something philanthropically, and I do them to basically address big issues, big opportunities, and big problems that need to be addressed, whether it's an artificial intelligence or China, rest of the world relationship, or doing something at my alma mater where they never had a central place where everybody could go, and I thought that would be a good idea. And so everything I do, I try and just make things better. and help. And I have no personal reference to legacy. It's it's just not something that motivates me. I live in today and the future. I don't live in the past. I incorporate the past in my life to learn from it, but I'm very forward looking. And the idea that this game is actually going to end someday and somebody is going to assess me, maybe a psychological or rational fall short. But that's not just the way I'm constructed. I don't think about legacies.
David, one of your areas of focus is creation of something called patriotic philanthropy. What is that exactly?
Well, it's a misleading term, but philanthropy obviously means the derivative. It's a derivative of a Greek word that means loving humanity. So it doesn't really mean just writing checks. And I like to remind people, if you give your time, your energy, your ideas, that can be as valuable as giving your money. Obviously, we don't look at it that way when we list great philanthropists. We list at the money, but things are more important than just the money. It's your time and energy. It can be just as valuable. Patriotic philanthropy is a phrase designed to say, not that I'm more patriotic or somebody's more patriotic than somebody who's a soldier and giving up their lives potentially, but it means that you're trying to remind people of the history and heritage of our country in a way that shows the good and the bad, so that people will know more about our past than they do. Right now, people don't know very much about our past and the way our government works. In fact, recently I just read this, that if people who want to be a citizen of this country, they have to take a citizenship test. You take 6 out of 10 questions. You study 100. You take 6 out of 10, and you pass 6 out of 10 in an oral exam, and you get to be a citizen of your country if you meet the other standards. 27,000 Americans were recently given the same test who are native born, and in 49 out of 50 states, a majority of citizens couldn't even pass the basic citizenship test. That means they don't know much about our history and our government. So patriotic philanthropy is just designed to remind people a little bit more about our history and heritage, on the theory that if you know the past a little bit, maybe be helpful in avoiding some of the mistakes we've made in the past.
Got it. Okay, let's go to students. Let's see, there's a student named Ben Hmong. Where's Ben? Wait, Ben, you're not a student. Who are you? Are you Zoom bombing in this class?
Good afternoon, David. Good afternoon, Steve and David and the class. Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben Hmong. Currently, I'm the Chief Investment Officer of CalPERS, which is the largest US public pension fund. And David was so kind to ask me to join the class so that I can have this first-hand experience to listen to Steve and David to share with us their wisdom. And David also asked me to ask a surprise question to Steve and David. You two are the firms you guys run are the two largest partners for CalPERS. I guess my question, do you know how much money you manage for us?
I think we manage $8 billion, Ben.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
David, do you know?
7.2 billion.
So Steve, you got to get some more money from Ben, David.
A little bit more.
Yeah, I guess you like Steve better.
Yeah. No, it's just the evolution of the firm. As I said, you two probably the largest partner we have. And first of all, I want to thank you for the great partnership in the past decades, for your great contribution to our system. As you know, we manage the health and retirement benefits for more than 2 million members of hardworking public servants of California. So thank you for that. And we look forward to continuing the relationship. I know the world is very challenging from many aspects, but with great partners like Blackstone and Carlyle, we feel very confident we can manage through all the crises. So that's all I have, David.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go to some of the students. Let's start with Franco. Maybe just introduce yourself and where you're from.
Yes, hello, my name is Franco. Thanks, David and Steve, for joining us. I'm originally from Argentina, and I'm now a first-year student at TAC. Today in class, we review a little bit of ESG and impact investing in the private equity landscape. And I'm personally with a colleague, a first-year student, I'm doing some research to understand how private equity firms approach impact investing and how they define that. And there are many approaches. And when we look at your firms, we found that instead of raising a specific impact fund or defining an impact investing strategy, you two embraced and took a more holistic approach into defining ESG policy and incorporating it into the entire investing process, from investing through ownership to exiting. Could you speak a little more about how did you arrive to the conclusion that that was the best approach for your firm? And then if you have any suggestions for private equity firms that are not doing anything around that yet and want to incorporate some impact into their investment thesis.
Steve?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, please go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I think, firms that are enlightened incorporate these kinds of policies into their investments. And this has become a very sort of high profile issue recently. We find out that, just for example, in the energy area, that when we apply an approach to saving energy, you often save enormous amount of money as well. And so things of that type are, they're win-win situations. Some people think that ESG has to be you're sacrificing something to help society. In fact, if you have an intelligent approach, everybody's a winner in terms of hiring, and giving people a fair shot. That's just a basic principle of any great service firm. And it's about meritocracy. It's about talent. It's not about how people look or where they come from. I mean, you're supposed to be giving people a great shot because it's also good for the business. And as you look at renewables, we've been pretty big in that area. And we had the first, I guess was the first or second, sort of a wind farm in the North Sea and the largest in Mexico. And so these are all interesting areas. I don't look at it so much as, so one part of a firm does that, another one doesn't. We're in the process of raising a pool of money for that area, to the extent there's a lot of interest in the institutional community, and we'll find out about that. So that's sort of how we approach it. It's just part of us.
Say in the early days of private equity, the principal concern of many investors and GPs was getting the highest rate of return that one could legally get on a deal. Today, that's changed. And so people are willing to take different approaches and to make certain that ESG is a very important part of whatever they might do. And investors are increasingly concerned about that as well. It's just not 100% clear whether if you have the spectacular rates of return, whether your ESG is not so good, whether investors will give you money or not. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. If you have very bad returns and you have great ESG, you probably aren't going to get any money. So you've got to have reasonably good returns and pretty good ESG today to get any money. And I think ESG is very important, and all the large firms have put pretty good systems in place. The reason we haven't done a separate ESG fund is we think everything is ESG. So you wouldn't really have a separate fund because everything we do has to be ESG. And I think Steve probably has the same view.
Amanda?
Yeah, thank you both so much for coming. I'm Amanda. I'm a second year. I'm from Cleveland. David, I'm curious, during your Leadership Live interview series, what surprised you most in your conversations with CEOs about the way their firms are responding to the pandemic? And I'm also curious which CEOs you think are doing a really great job addressing the crisis.
So let me ask you a question first. I'm an interviewer, so do you have a job lined up yet?
I do. I'll be working in consulting.
Consulting? What about private equity?
Maybe one day. Are you hiring?
Well, we'll see. Depends on a variety of factors, but we're always looking for very talented people.
You have to do well in this course, though. So that's.
To answer your question, I have been surprised at how many CEOs are feeling their companies adapted pretty well to the new norm, which is to say, working at home has not turned out to be as bad as people thought. People have learned how to use technology reasonably well. But CEOs are sort of being honest when they say to me obliquely, they're not sure that everybody that's currently working for them will come back to work because A, they may not want to come back to work in an office environment. And secondly, the company may not need them in the future because companies are going to reshape themselves a fair bit and they may not need as many workers as they once did. But they say that a little bit more obliquely. But I have been surprised at how many of them are saying it's working reasonably well, given all the constraints that they've now find themselves in.
Chris McMahon, you had a question maybe Steve can take?
Yeah, I'm Chris Mann. I'm a second year from Boston, Massachusetts. I did have a question here. This can prevent attractive investment opportunities for private equity funds. So I'm just kind of curious, how could firms like Carlyle and Blackstone take advantage of the attractive investment opportunities that are sure to arise from a public health crisis with inviting more scorn from PE's typical critics?
Without inviting more scorn, right?
So, yeah, sorry. I don't know if
Okay, you just cut out a little, yeah.
Yeah, I had a little difficulty hearing him because he was.
Yeah, I think the question, Steve, was there's going to be some great business opportunities, investment opportunities, given valuations and given the chaos, but private equity's been in the public eye and been criticized. So how do you take advantage of the opportunities out there without a concomitant scorn or criticism in the public?
Well, there are two different questions, I think, incorporated in that. And, you know, private equity has had like a difficult time winning the hearts and minds of certain political people and certain media people. And that's actually sort of an unfair rap because the way you make money in private equity is actually growing companies and investing in companies. And the faster they grow, the higher the PE on exit. And so the people who have this sort of negative view are sort of stuck in the 1980s when it was a cost-cutting business. And now all the studies show that private equity, certainly at a minimum, you know, doesn't do anything worse for jobs than regular companies, doesn't go bankrupt with any more frequency. And so the whole argument is basically not founded on logic or facts. But leaving that aside, because we're in a world now where facts and logic, unlike when David and I were younger, that actually mattered. Now, you know, what matters is simply assertion without any backing of it. But in terms of how you take advantage of things, there are a lot of ways. You know, sometimes people need to borrow money when they have this situation where there's no revenue and their companies are about to collapse, and you lend the money at what ends up being a market clearing rate. There are businesses that are going to grow much faster in the future in the healthcare area, where there's going to be a lot of investment, not just in the US, but globally. There are businesses that, you know, are really beaten down in terms of their prospects at the moment. They don't have to be at zero revenue, but, you know, they're going to need investment. There's nothing wrong with giving them investment. And so, you know, there are a lot of things to do one thing I would say is with the stock market going up so much so fast, some of that sort of crisis area value in the equity markets has been pretty much arbed out in a lot of cases, particularly with the strongest companies. You know, you have to, there's still plenty of opportunities in the debt markets, some of which have been left off of the Fed programs. I just wanted to finish and thank Ben for stopping by. Usually you have to fly out to Sacramento to see Ben, or you know, occasionally he drifts into New York. But one of the wonderful things about Zoom is everybody can just show up. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to waste any time. And the other good thing about Zoom is, as opposed to being in a real meeting where, unless the table is small and round, usually those rectangular tables, you never can see anybody on your side, or you can't hear the people at the end if you're at the other end. Whereas here you could look at everybody and figure out what's going on. So that's a good thing. So Ben, thank you for showing up.
Alexa, we have a question. You want to take the next question, Alexa? Introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Alexa Gales. I'm a second-year student at Tuck, and I'm from Toronto, Canada. First, I wanted to thank you both so much for being here. We really appreciate it. I have a question about, given both of your experience, very robust experience in the private sector, public sector, as well as both being enormously generous philanthropists, on what you feel the responsibility should be, especially in these changing environment of philanthropy versus the public sector.
Well, I guess if you're in the public sector and you're working for the government, you are presumably trying to do something for the public good, and you're not being compensated very heavily, so you're making a financial sacrifice, but you get the psychological pleasure of helping your country. And I think there's people that do that deserve a lot of credit for doing that, particularly when they're giving up the opportunity cost of doing so many other things. In the philanthropic world, you can help the country by doing things with your philanthropy. And then now I think the country really needs a lot of help in the healthcare, food areas, in responding to the crises that hospitals have had. So I think many good philanthropists now are targeting some of their money to go into helping with food distribution, or food availability, or medical equipment for people that need it. And I think that's a very good thing. And a lot of philanthropists have made very big steps in that direction. And I think that's what I think a lot of people are doing now, is to retargeting some of their money in a short-term period of time for some of these challenges.
I think to follow on what David's saying, there's going to be a huge second wave need for philanthropy. And the reason is that the economy is going to get back to work slowly, because it's hard to sync up a whole economy and just turn it on like it's a light switch. And as a result of that, tax revenues are going to be down across the board virtually everywhere. What happens when tax revenues are down, you either raise taxes or you cut expenses. To cut expenses for government means you don't provide services. This will turn out to be a very impactful thing in terms of its effect on individuals in that, you know, state, city, or town. And what's going to happen is each of the institutions in those jurisdictions are going to call somebody up who they think has resources and say, help me, help us. The scale is going to be stunning in terms of the need. And, you know, I think David was talking about the need in the short term, you know, which is absolutely true. But the second wave will be way bigger in terms of needs for philanthropy, I think.
I had a question for you, just watching the two of you interact, which is great. So you've been competitors, rivals, you've known each other for a long time. How do you consider each other friends, competitors, frenemies? Like, how do you think of each other?
Well, I consider Steve a friend. We've in competition, but in business to some extent. But I don't think that should interfere with being a friend. And Steve and I have socialized together, and I think enjoyed each other's company. And so I don't think anything other than a friendship is what I would regard it as.
Yeah, I'd say that I've known David a long time, and I have a lot of respect for him. He wasn't particularly funny today because of the format, but I'll tell you, you can't stop this guy.
Yeah,
he's so funny. And he's also one of the world's greatest salesmen. He's raised so much money, trust me money, from people. He's got an enormous work ethic. He's unstoppable. In the philanthropic area, he covers more grounds, involved with more philanthropies, more boards, and he runs things. He doesn't just join them. So I have enormous respect for David. As he said, I chose him to be my successor at the Kennedy Center, and I had a lot of people say, "Why would you ever do that? You're boosting a competitor." I said, "I don't view David as a competitor. I view David as a talent, as a friend. He will do a great job for the Kennedy Center. And, that's my job, to make sure that the center is in great hands." And he's done an amazing job there. So, what happens as you get older, if people are nice, you don't have a problem with them competing. Your job's to beat them. But their job is to beat you. That's separate from your relationship as people. I've been watching The Last Dance, which is on ESPN, which is about Michael Jordan, who's the greatest basketball player who ever played. And, him talking about his relationships with people that he competed with, and, Magic Johnson talking about him. There's enormous friendship. He played golf with Larry Bird, who was another one of those head-to-head competitors. And, that's the way it works as a grown-up. If people, are nice people. The fact that you're doing the same kind of thing is, in a way, even better, because you can understand each other and your lives in a way that other people can't.
So I would say Steve and I do remind many people of Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. I think our athletic skills and so forth. Steve actually was a great athlete in high school, and they went to Yale to be a track star, as I recall, right?
Yeah.
Okay, two last questions. Let's see, Liz Lavin, who's calling in from Singapore, actually, she's been up since 3 a.m.
Hi, thank you guys for joining. My name's Liz. Yeah, I'm in Singapore right now. I'm curious to know, we learned a lot about both of your philanthropic endeavors through readings last night, and I'm curious to know how COVID has changed both of your personal strategies for your philanthropy going forward.
David?
David, you want to start?
So, look, many things that I have done are things that, help well-known institutions and so forth maybe get to be a little bit better. But when you see people in this country in food lines, you see people not able to get medical treatment. Obviously, you want to redirect some of your money to those things. So I have done that, but I don't have enough money to impact all the food needs in the United States or the healthcare needs. But maybe, if I do some of these things, other people will follow, and other people will do that. And same with Steve. So people follow what Steve does as well. But I think clearly this has shown the weaknesses that we have in some of our country's social systems and so forth. So I have redirected some money in that area, and I will continue to do so.
Yeah, I believe what David's talking about, but I've had some some interesting experiences as a result of the COVID thing. And I have a program called the Schwartzman Scholars that Dave Marchick had mentioned. And built a college at Tsinghua University in Beijing. And what happened when the virus started affecting China, it just happened to be when they had a New Year's break, Chinese New Year's, and we made sure everybody was out of the country who was not Chinese who lived there. And so we ended up with this situation with 80% of our students is scattered in 40 different countries. And so we had to do some really, so at that point, pretty unique things to keep the program together. And, with distance learning, we were like one of the first real programs that sort of did that. And then we experimented with different things. We were going to take everybody to Abu Dhabi, and we had that all set up. And we waited a few days, and we decided not to do that for reasons of risk. And then Abu Dhabi got closed, and so we're dealing with distance. We've got a new class coming in. Right now, China is closed, so a new class couldn't go there anyhow. And the university's closed, but I anticipate the university will open before next August, this August. But I don't know that China will open its borders. And so we're setting up another whole thing, and we will have the new class, sort of distance. And we had to do all kinds of things financially to deal with that. So each of us have had all kinds of unusual things where we've stood up and tried to help different programs that we're involved with, or new things. Each of our firms, we put up a bunch of money for people in New York. It's in the $15 to $20 million range, let alone all the individual things that our firm at Blackstone and Carlyle have done to help with the COVID crisis. There's so many different programs. I think we just gave away, I heard this morning, one of our, sort of 200 companies just gave away 750,000 masks last week, and each one of them do different things. So it's an endless list of things that we address.
So let's go for the last question to a distinguished economist and the leader of Tuck, Matt Slaughter.
Thanks, Dave. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Steve and David. Over the arc of your lives and careers, you have seen great recessions, you've seen financial crises, you've seen political revolutions. This is truly an historic time for our students. So in their aspiration to go out from Tuck and become wise, decisive leaders who are going to better the world through business, what is one piece of advice that you would give to our students in this unprecedented time? Maybe I'd start with you, Steve, and then go to David.
Yeah, I'd say try and get a job at a place that can teach you a lot and hold on to it for a while. This is going to take some period of time before the system rights itself. And there are some terrific companies that are going to be hiring people, and there are going to be a lot of companies that will not be hiring people. Pick one, as David Rubenstein said. Nobody ever does great doing something they really don't love. Try and find one of these very strong companies that is still in great shape, that's doing something that's important to you or that you think you're going to be really good at, and make sure you land that, because there will be fewer jobs overall. And in a curious way, the fact that somebody's looking to hire means they're pretty strong in the first place. So that would be my advice.
My advice would be that you should all realize that there's a special place in heaven reserved for those who are Tuck alums who give back to Tuck. So if you give a large amount of money to Tuck, you're more likely to get to heaven. That's the most important thing you should know. But beyond that, I would say, don't think that because you have your degree, you are an educated person. Keep reading, keep reading and reading, exercise your muscle, your brain all the time. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to go against the wind. Try, find something that you really love. And if you want to be a leader, and I think there's more fun in being a leader than a follower, learn how to communicate effectively with people, learn how to share the credit with people, and very importantly, be ethical. When I first started practicing law, the first day, a very famous head of the firm came into my office, and came into the office of all the young associates, and said, the only thing you really have in life is your reputation. It takes a lifetime to build it and 5 minutes to destroy it. So remain ethical. Do not take the path of least resistance, and you will never regret that.
Well, Steve Schwartzman, David Rubenstein, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today. Thank you for your leadership. And most importantly, thank you for everything you're doing to make our country a better country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
That
thank you
completes
all.
our session.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.